Now let's get some budget reaction from the Shadow Scottish Secretary, Ian Murray. Good afternoon, Ian Murray.
Good afternoon, Andrew. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. You've been watching the Chancellor's budget, now a very different budget from where we were a year ago. You must welcome the continuing funding to help people through the pandemic.
Well, obviously, we certainly do accept that. However, it is too slow again. It's been announced at the 11th hour, and we would rather the Chancellor set out a longer-term plan rather than the stop-start uncertainty that he's giving to both businesses and to individuals. But of course we welcome it. We're very disappointed that the 3 million excluded people who've had no support aren't in the budget. They certainly deserve to be, and very, very disappointed there was nothing about public sector pay. It looks as if the Chancellor is just giving the public sector workers who've kept the country going a clap rather than any money in their pay packet. So there's lots in there, and one of the key questions, I think, from a Scottish context that has to be answered from the budget is what the Scottish Government will be doing with the £1.2 billion and, as Audit Scotland said last week, the £2.7 billion that's unspent. Every single penny of that has to go into the Scottish economy to support people and businesses and has to be spent now.
I think your boss, Keir Starmer, and the SNP are going along the same lines of warning of a possible return to austerity. Keir Starmer was saying that Rishi Sunak is itching to pull away the mask to reveal the usual face of a Conservative Chancellor, in his words. This is a Chancellor who's spending a huge amount of money. You're just painting an incorrect picture, aren't you, here?
Well, not at all, because in actual fact, if the Chancellor wanted to do as his flashy videos are trying to make out that he wants to do, he would have extended universal credit uplift, for example, either for a year or on a permanent basis, which is what all the children's charities have been crying out for. He would have put in place a proper structure for the people who have been losing out in terms of not getting any government support, and he would have been able to fix the foundations of the economy that have been undermined over the last 10 years. Let's not forget that the reason we're in this position and the reason the Chancellor has had to intervene in such a massive way, the biggest intervention since the Second World War, is because the Conservative government have spent the last 10 years hollowing out public services, hollowing out local councils, hollowing out our economy. We have 3.6 million people now on short-term contracts and on zero-hours contracts. When you put all that together in a crisis like coronavirus hits, it's very, very difficult then to be able to determine what happens next, and that's why he's left in such a pickle.
But is Rishi Sunak perhaps not being realistic here? He's helping people just now, but then he will have to get the nation's finances back on track. Keir Starmer was critical of him for focusing and hoping for a big consumer spending boost after the pandemic. But is the Chancellor not actually just being quite practical?
Well, of course we have to pay down the debt, of course we have to pay down the deficit, and of course the country has to get the finances back on track. But you don't do that now. There is no economist in the world who's been saying at this moment in time you should rein in public spending and you should find a way of stopping that support. And in fact, with interest rates so low, and the Chancellor made this statement himself, the government should be borrowing in order to invest, in order to make sure we can come out of this crisis quicker. So what you do in these kinds of crises, and we made this argument in 2010 after the global financial crash, is government borrows to invest in order to get the economy back on track, to create jobs. There was nothing at all in this budget about jobs, nothing about poverty, nothing about inequality, nothing about fixing those underlying problems in both our economy and our public services in order to ensure that if any kind of crisis hits in the future, we're not left in this disastrous situation that coronavirus has shone a very bright light on.
What did you make of the £1.2 billion for Scotland? I suppose that might go to help kind of plug the gap in a sense.
Well, the Audit Scotland report last week was very interesting. I think Scotland's had, up until today, £9.7 billion of additional coronavirus support and only spent £7 billion. So there's £2.7 billion unaccounted for so far, and another £1.2 billion from the budget today. It's great to get an extra £1.2 billion, but every single penny of whatever is left from before and whatever is coming now has to be spent now on supporting those businesses and supporting people. We've got B&Bs and guest houses not getting the support that they deserve, although they've been forced to close. We've got hospitality businesses falling by the wayside, and that's why we called for a smart furlough scheme to invest in those businesses that are going to be the hardest hit and take longest to recover. So every single penny of what's just been sent to Scotland must be spent by the Scottish Government now and not put into some post-election war chest to bribe voters. The economy needs it now, individuals need it now, so it has to be spent now, every single penny.
Ian Murray, Labour's Shadow Scottish Secretary, thank you very much for joining us.